Mark 2:13. He went out again beside the sea, and all the crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. And as he reclined at table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclined with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And the scribe of the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, and said to his disciple, "Why does he eat with the tax collectors and sinners?" And when Jesus heard it, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need for a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but the sinners." Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, and the people came and said to him, "Why do John's disciple and the disciple of Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "Can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegrooms with them, they cannot fast. And the day they will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. Now, no one sew a piece of unshrunk clothes on an old garment. If he does, the patch tear away from it, the new from the old, and the worse tear is made. And no one puts the new wine into the old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skin, and the wine is destroyed. And so are the skins. But new wine is for the fresh wineskins."
Good morning. So, how many of you have ever read fan fiction? Raise your hand and be shamed. No, like, come on, you. I know some of you are not raised. So fan fiction is when you take some kind of world, like the Harry Potter world, and then you write a story set in the world. And so all the Harry Potter ones are like Harry Potter getting together with Hermione or other relationship stuff mixing. There are lots of different interesting pairings in the Harry Potter fan fiction universe. But another thing that distinguishes fan fiction from the actual fiction has to do with the skillfulness of the writers, okay? Now, there are many, this is what I've heard, I haven't read a lot, but I've actually heard that there are some incredibly good fan fiction writers. So they can capture the dialogue, they can create the setting, the plot, the conflict, everything is well crafted, it's great. But those are, I'm sure, the very small minority of fan fictions out there, because there are thousands and thousands and millions of fan fictions people have written. And one thing that demonstrates the badness of the writing of fan fiction is that the characters are not three-dimensional, okay? So what makes a three-dimensional character? The character is rounded, not shallow, right? There's an interior life, there's emotions you can sense in the character. They make decisions that make sense. They're like real people. They don't just do dumb stuff. They're not reduced to one element of their character. So, for example, in a lot of bad writing by males, women in the stories will be reduced to how they relate to the guy. You know? So if you see an action movie, probably the greatest, well, not the great, but one great example of this is the Indiana Jones franchise, where the women in Indiana Jones, especially in the Temple of Doom, number 2, She is an incredibly annoying, grating character who basically fawns over Indiana Jones. She has no personality. She's just kind of annoying. And that's because the writers have not crafted a three-dimensional character. They've crafted a two-dimensional character. So and now, okay, all of you girls out there, think for a second about some of the K-dramas you watch. Are the guys in the K-dramas very well-rounded three-dimensional characters who make interesting decisions and have their own? I'm sure there are some where the guys are well-developed, rounded characters, but in other K-dramas, maybe even a majority, they are a set of abs and they're nice hair. Like, that's basically all they are. They have no brain, they have no personality. They're also rich. Okay, so yes, that three combination, so they are three-dimensional in terms of having abs, money, and hair. But they're not well-rounded characters. Okay, anyway, I was thinking to myself that so they do have three dimensions, but they're very shallow dimensions, okay? Now, if you were to think about Jesus, is he a three-dimensional person to you? Okay? So when we read through the Gospels, actually, let's not talk about the Gospels for a second. Let's talk about your impression of what Jesus is like as a person, okay? When we think about Jesus, we have presuppositions, we have impressions of Jesus based on the Christians we know, based on what our parents say, based on how our parents use Jesus, based on how Christians act around us, how they try to get us to do stuff for them, whatever it might be. And so there are different impressions people can have of Jesus. One of them, a lot of people call like buddy Jesus, where, they're like buddy Jesus is like, he's kind of like happy, he's really chill, he loves and accepts everyone, but he never would cause conflict or tension, okay? This Jesus is the type of friend who, when you have food on your face, he won't tell you because that would mean causing you embarrassment, right? And he doesn't want to cause conflict, right? Is that the type of friend you want? Is that the type of Jesus you want? Actually, let me ask you, would you rather your friends, you're trying on a new outfit, do you want your friend to tell you the truth about how you look in the outfit, or would you rather tell you sweet lies when you don't actually look good in it? Raise your hand. Who wants to actually be told that you don't look good in that outfit? Oh, so this is pretty interesting. Who wants sweet lies? My wife. I've learned that. I've learned that through painful experience. Whisper sweet nothings into her ear. No, just kidding. My wife looks great. She's due in June. Okay, I'm going to rebuke our church right now, because our church, my wife walks around in our church building due in June, and Chinese parents come up to her and they say, "You look really big." How dare they? How dare they? So stop it. Tell her sweet nothings. Like, oh, look how skinny you look. Jesus is a three-dimensional character. And as we read through, especially the section that we're coming into, this is something about Jesus that I want all of you to know. Jesus will tell you where you have food on your face. Jesus will tell you the truth about your real issues and conditions. Now, Jesus is so incredibly gentle and sensitive. Jesus never will inflict unnecessary pain. But the problem is, in order for Jesus to be a real person, it means he challenges and confronts us in areas we need that, okay? So I was using purposefully accessible examples: food on your face, clothing that doesn't look good on you. Here's another one. Would you want your friends to confront you about real serious character flaws that you have? Or would you rather they just accept you, not mention it, just adapt, adjust to you? What do you think? Confront, raise your hand. Accept, raise your hand. So this is really interesting, right? What if there was someone who could actually lovingly, gently, tactfully, patiently tell you the truth about areas that you need help, and they're willing to be committed to you even if you don't change, or even if the change takes a long time? Isn't that basically the ideal friend? Many of us, because we have this impression of buddy Jesus, Jesus is vanilla, Jesus is basic, because look at all those basic vanilla church people, right? They don't do bad stuff, they don't have fun, they don't go partying, whatever. That's what church people are like, right? That's what Jesus is like. Actually, Jesus is completely different than your impression of him. And so, as you read through the Gospels, what I hope can happen is Jesus can become a little bit more three-dimensional. And if we believe that Christianity is having a relationship with Jesus, then this will actually help you know when Jesus is interacting with you. Because, again, we can't see Jesus, but Jesus interacts with us. And the category of behaviors and actions that Jesus can have towards you is very different than the ones we imagine. Jesus doesn't just want to make you feel good. Okay? Did you hear that? Like, the Bible is not like the Bible is not an opioid. It doesn't simply remove the pain symptoms. The Bible actually is more like a painful surgery, where the Bible goes deep. The Bible removes, diagnoses, and deals with the real issues we have in a way that is painful and difficult. But that's because that's what it requires to change. That's what it requires to be healed. And so what I want you to notice is Jesus relates to people in a very different way than religious people relate to people. And so we're going to look through this section, and I have 3/4 points. The first one is that Jesus interrupts the ordinary, okay? The second one, Jesus tears down walls to seek the sick. Number 3, Jesus bursts the old to make way for the new. And he does all of this, so this is the fourth point, so we can join the wedding feast, okay? He interrupts the ordinary, he tears down walls to seek the sick, he bursts the old to make way for the new, and this is all so we can join the wedding feast. So there are a lot of, to some degree I'm making a straw person, which is when you kind of exaggerate certain aspects or you create like a caricature. To some degree, serving in a youth group, I've noticed that many parents want their kids to be good Chinese people, right? Like, they want them to go to a good school, get a good job, respect their family, get married, have kids so they can be grandchildren or grandparents, do the right things. And so in many cases, what I see is that people bring their kids to church so that church can teach them to listen to their parents, to try hard at school and get good grades, and they also have them avoid the negative influences of places outside of church. But what I want to suggest to people who have that mindset is Jesus disrupts your plans for the future. If you actually introduce your kid to Jesus, he might send your kid somewhere that you would never expect and never want your kid to go, because Jesus will not be contained by your small plans. Jesus disrupts the conventional, typical way of going about life. At least if you meet Jesus truly, if you meet him as a real three-dimensional person. Okay, so let's see the 3 points. Jesus went out again beside the sea, and all the crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, I don't know how to say that word, sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. So I'm going to look at this from two perspectives. Number one, from the perspective of a typical Chinese parent. Levi is a tax collector. And a tax collector is a quite stable, lucrative, money-related profession. And so he has a good job. He's actually very, very well off. He's hanging out by the sea, where fishermen would have to get their fish, bring them in, and he gets a cut of everything. Everything that these businessmen are able to provide. And so he's like an accountant, or he's like, he works for the IRS. But now that's one perspective. The other perspective is when you understand the historical and cultural context for this, this is actually the exact profession you don't want your kid to have. Because for a Jewish person, this would have been absolutely terrible. This would have been absolutely terrible. Number one, he would have basically offended all of your politics. Because you are Jewish, and you are a Roman colony. You're occupied by Rome, and he is basically a traitor to your culture, a traitor to your nation. So he offends your politics. Number two, he offends your religion. Tax collectors were considered unclean. Basically, everything about them was unclean because in order to be a tax collector, they have to deal with people who are not Jewish. And so they would be contaminated by the uncleanness of the pagan people who have bacon for breakfast, right? So think about it for a second. This is the way that the Jewish mindset works based on their understanding of the Old Testament scriptures. If Kaylee eats bacon in the morning, she is unclean. And then if she is... Yes, this is what I want for our church. So now that you're unclean, you have to hold up a sign that says unclean, unclean, and shout really loud. So you would actually pass that on to whoever you interact with. And so if you were to help me study, by me studying with you, I would also become unclean. And so tax collectors would have been pariahs. They would have been shunned and avoided. So they're both traitors. They're the Benedict Arnolds. They also are religiously ostracized. Third thing, they take your money. This is a really big deal. And not only that, they're unscrupulous. So they take your money, and the way that they get rich is by taking more than is required. So the Roman government would say, here's your quota, and then they would not make any money from the Roman government. They would live on the extra money that they collected from people. And so some tax collectors were extraordinarily rich and wealthy because they took extra. So are these people you want to invite to dinner, They take your money, they make you unclean. These are not the people you want to invite over for dinner. But here, what's so crazy is, as Jesus is teaching, as he's walking by this tax collector booth, he sees Levi sitting at the tax booth, doing his job, and he says, "Follow me." So Jesus chooses a person who is across political lines. He is defrauding people. He is a social and religious pariah. And Jesus says, "I want you to be my disciple." So now this is really crazy because if our church was is this the type of person you would imagine goes to church? I don't think so. Right? So the people Jesus chooses disciples does not fit into our nice little middle-class vision of what our life should be like, right? Look, I'm not saying those things are bad. God can bless us. Study hard. Use your talents. Glorify God. Steward your abilities, all that stuff. But this is really crazy. Jesus does not act the way we expect. And he actually confronts religious thinking, okay? One of the greatest critiques of religion is Jesus. Is that weird? Is that weird to say? Does that burst your categories a little bit? Now let's look at it from the perspective of Levi. Levi's just doing his job, It's like every other day at the office, Monday, Friday, 9 to 5. It's like lunchtime. It's like 2 p.m., whatever. He's just like, defrauding some people, everyday stuff. Jesus comes by and he interrupts his job. He interrupts his work. And then he says, drop everything you're doing and come follow me. So now, if you're a parent and you want your kid to go to church, what I hope happens at our church is as kids and people come to know who Jesus is, they allow themselves to be interrupted by Jesus. What this means is you are faithful and you do what you do. You're a good student, whatever it might be. You go to college, you work hard, you have to choose some kind of job to go after, some kind of career, and so you work at that career. But at any point, one day, if Jesus said to you, actually, I want you to do something different, would you be willing to be interrupted? And would the parent who wanted them to be a nice, successful software engineer, like I think about Enoch, Enoch had a good software engineering job, and then he felt the call of God, and so he quit his job as a I guess you're not super highly compensated compared to other software engineers, but well-compensated, stable, successful career. That is the perfect foundation for all these different things. And he basically said, God is calling me. And so he went to Australia, he went to Hillsong College and learned how to do like soundboard stuff and music and all these different things. And that's more like what meeting Jesus looks like. Now, meeting Jesus does not necessarily mean you quit your job. It doesn't mean you necessarily go to a foreign country and become a missionary or become a pastor, but it could. Jesus could ask you. Jesus interrupts us. And so what does it look like if you have a regular day job, you're a regular software engineer, whatever it might be? Jesus interrupts and disrupts even your every day-to-day job. Jesus changes the way you relate to people you interact with. Where before it was all about the up and up, it's all about making money. Now it's actually about showing love and care for the people you interact with at work. And so the example, I always use Ashley for this example. Like when she had her first job, so she's also a software engineer. When she was working at a startup, she was not like a Bible-thumping, like in-your-face Christian where it's like, you got to convert, you're a sinner, you need God. But instead, she showed love and care for people in the context of working for them, and through her presence and through her openness about her faith, coworkers who are like Hindu or different things, one Hindu coworker was going through some problems, and she asked Ashley to pray for her, which is really incredible, right? So she was not closed off. She was not hiding her faith. She also wasn't obnoxious. Now, that's actually what it looks like to have God interrupt the regular way that you would interact, right? So he says to Levi, follow me. He interrupts his work, and then Levi rose and followed him. Let's keep going. Jesus tears down walls to seek the sick. Let's look at this next part. And as Jesus reclined at table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And the scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, said to his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? And so here's another way that Jesus disrupts the religious mindset. Jesus eats and associates and even goes towards the people who are sinners and religious pariahs, the people who don't have their lives together, the people who could be a negative, contaminating influence on him. Well, they can't be on him, but these are the people we're afraid of associating with. These are the people we stay away from, right? But Jesus actually goes to them and eats with them. And so look at what the scribes do. The scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, said to his disciples. And so we have these two two different groups. We have Jesus who eats with sinners and tax collectors. To eat with someone, it's like the people you eat with at lunch. It means you're friends. It means you're part of the group. Back then, it would have been even more like this, where to eat with them means that you associate, you have a relationship with them. And so this was a really big deal. And so the scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw this, said to his disciples, "Why does he eat with them?" What's going on here? This is a religious mindset that many Christian churches can have. And this is where Jesus will not allow these mindsets to exist. They are here. They're in our church. They're in our hearts. These are, in a sense, the default human operating system that we run by, which is what the Pharisees are like. The Pharisees have certain moral and religious standards, and then when they see someone who does not fit into their idea of the moral and religious activities, they look down on them, they judge them, and then they stay away from them, okay? But that's not how Jesus does this, right? The other thing I would notice, so you could ask the question, how do I know I have a religious mindset? And I'm using this in a bad way, right? You don't want to associate with people who are not like you in almost any way. You can't relate to or understand or like people across political lines. If they don't believe your politics, they are evil and wrong and bad, and I can't talk with them, or I look down on them. The other thing you can notice is they're passive aggressive. So what they don't do is they don't go up to Jesus and say, "What are you doing? Why are you eating with them?" Instead, they see Jesus doing it from a distance, and then they go to his disciples, and then they argue with the disciples, right? And so the religious mindset does not directly confront people. Often it does, and this is where you get berated or like whatever. But that's a different story. In this part, at least, it's characterized by kind of judging from a distance, and then judging and letting that judgment completely poison your love and care for the people who you disagree with, right? When they saw he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, they said to his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Let's keep going. When Jesus heard it, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." And so here's where we see something incredible. Jesus is super duper smart. When Jesus interacts with people, he always is throwing out zingers. This is a huge zinger, because what he's saying is, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. What is he saying? He's saying, I am a doctor, and if I am a doctor, I would be absolutely useless if I only hung out with other healthy people, wouldn't I? Isn't that super messed up? Imagine if you were a doctor who who would only go to places where only well people were. Like, what if there's a doctor who basically would only hang out with people who are like super duper fit and active and like they have no health problems whatsoever? And then the moment someone says, "Oh, actually, I like twisted my ankle," or my stomach hurts, they're like, "Oh, sorry, I can't be around you. I only hang out with good people." Is that the purpose of a doctor? Jesus is saying, you Pharisees and scribes, you religious people, because of your fear, because you're afraid that they'll contaminate you, you stay away from the very people who, in a sense, most need your help. You have the Word of God, and they're the very ones who need this healing from God, and yet because you are so self-preserving, you want to stay away from them. Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. So what does it mean when he says, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick? He says, I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. And so this is where, like I was talking about before, Jesus tells us the true bad news about ourselves. And he, as a physician, gives us the diagnosis that we don't want to hear. The diagnosis is that we are sick. And one way of understanding the biblical doctrine of sin is to say sin is just saying that there is something wrong and broken and diseased about us. Now, the difference between a disease and sin is it's not your fault if you get sick. But sin is there's something deeply wrong with our soul and our will and our value system and what we do. There's something diseased about our heart, our very personality, our being. There's something so deeply wrong with us that we need healing, and we need Jesus to come save us. And so here's the crazy thing. The Pharisees are so convinced that they're good that they don't need healing. And because they know they're good and don't need healing, they don't associate with people who aren't religious and good like them. But Jesus is completely different. And so Jesus actually tears down walls to seek the sick. Look, how does he do this? Number one, he calls a tax collector to be his disciple. So he is tearing down political, religious, social walls. He is tearing down the system of religious thinking that says people who aren't Christian will contaminate me if I spend time with them. Instead, he is saying, I have such a deep compassion and care for people who don't know God and are sick that I'm willing to break down walls to go after them and show love for them. Now, they confront sinners. Jesus confronts sinners. There's a passage in John chapter 8, which we actually don't know if this is in the original manuscript, but I think it illustrates the point really well. In this passage, there is a woman who's caught in adultery. So everyone basically catches her committing adultery, and the Jewish law for that was she would be stoned to death. And so people are getting ready to execute her for committing adultery, and then Jesus stops them and he says, let the one who has no sin throw the first stone. So he's basically saying, if you're perfect, you can execute this woman. And so everyone loves that, where it's like, oh yeah, adultery, like don't judge this person, don't you dare, demean her and all that stuff. And he says, let those who have no sin throw the first stone. And so no one throws a stone at her because they all realize, like, I also am a sinner. But then Jesus says, go to the woman, go and sin no more. You get me? So Jesus both confronts a religiously harsh and strict and unself-aware mindset that says, I am so perfect and righteous that I can judge you. But he also confronts an attitude that says, adultery is totally acceptable and fine. Like, sin is not bad. Sin is not bad. Just do what you want as long as it doesn't hurt someone. But the thing is, adultery hurts people. Adultery is a sin against God, but it's also just like devastating for social relationships, right? And so when Jesus confronts our sin, the sin in us, it's never because he just wants to kill us or it's not because he wants to hurt us. It's because there is something we're doing and capable of doing that actually hurts people. It actually hurts people. And so there are the really big religious ones like, oh my gosh, like doing drugs. Everyone in church is like, oh my gosh, that's such a terrible thing. But there are other religious sins that we don't really talk a lot about, like religious people who are harsh, religious people who are greedy. We don't talk about those things, but those are totally in the same category of things that are destructive to relationships around you. And so Jesus, he doesn't call the righteous but sinners. And so he tears down walls to seek after people who are sick. And part of the way that he does that is by diagnosing every single one of us and saying, if you think you're righteous apart from Jesus, you are hopelessly lost. And you're in actually a worse place than the people who know that they're not well, right? So imagine for a second, there are two different people who both have cancer. horrible disease. One person refuses to accept the diagnosis of the doctor and says, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. The other person says, and then this person, like, they're like, oh, look at how, I was talking with Cliff, and he's like, how much do you bench press? And it's like, oh, I can bench press 225 pounds. How could I possibly have cancer? And so you give all the accomplishments. My energy level is great, blah, 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 blah. There's no way I have cancer. And the doctor's like, I have this scan right here. It's right there. But you can't acknowledge it. You're in denial. You don't want to hear that. The second person accepts what the doctor says and says, I have to go through this painful, difficult process of surgery, chemo, radiation, whatever it might be. And they accept the bad news. Who's in a better position? The first person or the second person? The first person feels better about themselves. The first person is like, oh, I feel great. What a great day that I don't have cancer. The second person is actually on the road to getting the help they need and the transformation. And so that's what Jesus is saying. You have to admit that you're sick before you can receive healing. And so church people can do this. They say, like the cancer patient, look at how much I read the Bible or pray or attend church or do all the right things. I'm not sick. I don't need Jesus. We totally do that. We totally do that. And it's demonstrated by our exclusion of people who are not like us or don't have the same backgrounds or whatever it might be. It's demonstrated by our arrogance and superiority. And you can see this all over the place, but it actually leads to resentment towards God and other things. That's a mindset that we can have. And then rather than seeing people as being lost and in need of God's grace and relationship with him, we see them as sinners to be avoided. And so we stay inside of our, some people call this the holy huddle, right? Where it's like, are you Christian? Are you Christian? Okay, let's form a circle and like box out all the other people. But this is not Jesus. Jesus breaks down the walls of that holy huddle to go outside to find more people who are lost and are in need of healing. He has the healing. He is the doctor. He has the medicine, and he goes to other people who need it desperately. This doesn't mean you're obnoxious about it, but it should create a sense of urgency where you say, I want to take every opportunity to share about the love of God. If someone just has the door open a little bit, let me take this opportunity to do it. Let's keep going. So a little bit of summary. The religious people build barriers to prevent infection. You get me? They want to avoid people who contaminate them. Jesus tears down walls to heal the sick. The Pharisees use spiritual practices as a scorecard. Jesus uses practices for relationship with God. This is how you can distinguish between church structures that we do. If your church structures are all about a scorecard where you think you're earning God's favor or his power through doing these things, through how much you do Bible study or pray or your biblical knowledge or whatever it might be, if you're using it as a scorecard so you can feel better than other people, you totally have it wrong. You totally have it wrong. If you want more Bible knowledge so you can feel smarter than people, you totally have it wrong. The spiritual practices which Jesus talks about, like prayer, scripture, fasting in this section, these are all for the purpose of shaping and forming you in your relationship with God so you can love and become like Jesus. These things, sermons, Bible study, prayer, these are all things that are forming our hearts, our insides, so that our inner life would be something like Jesus. Jesus' inner life and inner soul and parts. And that's the promise, actually, of being a disciple. You become like Jesus, not just your behaviors on the outside, but internally through following and learning from him. Okay? Let's keep going. Verse 18. Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, and people came and said to him, why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? So what's going on here? They're saying, Jesus, why aren't you committed like the rest of us? Jesus, why don't you go to our 5 a.m. prayer meetings like the rest of us? Are you really serious about God? What are they saying? They're saying we do things. So the Pharisees were really intense. They would have fasted twice a week, which means you basically purposefully don't eat food for some kind of spiritual reason. And this was not something that was taught in the law. So they were adding extra practices, and then they were saying, this is the new standard by which we will judge everyone within the church. So for example, if I, as a preacher, were to say, we're going to do a new religious practice, I want you to read your Bible at least 1 hour and 30 minutes every day. That's kind of like what the Pharisees were doing. It doesn't matter if you learn anything. It doesn't matter if you interact with God at all. I just want you to put your eyes on the words of the page for at least 1 hour and 30 minutes every day, and then you're good. That's kind of what they were doing. And so they're actually saying to Jesus and his disciples, you guys are not as committed as us. You guys are not as religious as us. Is Jesus really a good teacher? And then we'll see how Jesus kind of answers in one way later on, but I'm actually going to skip forward to these two images. So this is our third point. Jesus bursts the old to make way for the new. So there are two images that Jesus uses, and these are actually very strange, weird little parables. And so let me read I'm skipping to 21 and 22. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the patch tears away from it, the old from the new, and a worse tear is made. So Jesus answers the question about fasting by giving this first image about unshrunk cloth. So I got a really good deal on Amazon. I got 3 large men's t-shirts for, I think it was $7 or something. It was either $7 or $8. And so I'm like, nice, 3 great t-shirts. And then I put them in the wash, and they no longer were large men's t-shirts. They were probably like medium or maybe small to medium. They became too small for my body, and they were useless. That's what happens when you wash clothing, right? The clothing has to shrink. And so if you have a patch, if you have a hole in your clothing, and then you put a new patch of clothing on it, when you wash that clothes, the patch will shrink where the rest of the clothing has already shrunk, and so it'll tear the clothing more. And that's Jesus' point. And so what Jesus is saying here is, you cannot relate to me as one more patch in your way of thinking about life. Do you know what I mean? Religious people are willing to give God Sunday. We're willing to say, okay, God, we'll go to church every Sunday as long as you stay away from the rest of my life. God is one important part of my life to me, but all the rest of the time, I want my freedom to do what I want. And some really committed religious people are just more committed, where they're like, I'll give to God everything, but then God owes me. What Jesus is saying here is, you have to completely change your way of thinking. Jesus is not just one more patch in your patchwork quilt. You guys know a patchwork quilt, right? It's made of a bunch of those square patches, and you sew it all together. It makes really cool colors and stuff. And one of these patches is your school. One of these patches is your romantic relationships. One of these patches is your money. Jesus is one of those things in there, but he's just one among many. Jesus is not okay with that. Jesus, if that's your attitude towards Jesus, you have a religious mindset, and Jesus will tear down your whole system so that you understand who he really is. Jesus is the center of everything. He doesn't want you to give a part of your life. He wants your whole life as a disciple. Your whole life as a disciple. Let's look at the next image. No one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed, and so are the skins. So what's going on? It's a very similar image. If you put new wine, so wine is fermenting, which means there are microorganisms that do chemical reactions that changes the liquid, the grape juice, to make it alcoholic, and that chemical process produces gas that will fill the wineskin. And so if the wineskin is hard and brittle, like you can kind of imagine, something is like lying out in the sun, the leather gets all, like your sandals or something, you leave them out in the sun long enough, the leather gets all cracked and the bottom is like tearing apart. if you put new wine that is going through this fermentation process in this old, rigid system, old, rigid leather, it will burst, the wine will be ruined, the leather will be ruined, it'll all spill out. That's another image where Jesus is saying, I will burst, I will confront, I will challenge all of your religious categories. I am not a two-dimensional character. I am a three-dimensional God and man. And I want to challenge you. I want to confront your ways of thinking that are prejudiced. I want to confront the areas where you're holding on to different parts of your life. And if you do that, then this new wine, this life of Jesus, will tear the wineskins. And so when he's speaking to the Pharisees, he's saying your whole system of avoiding the contaminated sinners has to be absolutely demolished. You have to completely change the way you think about sin, where you no longer are righteous, but you're a sinner. And Paul says, there is none righteous, no, not one. And so if you're religious and you can't see your own issues, then there's something terribly wrong and you'll never be able to change. If you think that you're good if I think I'm good based on how much I read my Bible and pray, but I miss the ways that I'm not loving to my wife and my kids or other people, I have it completely wrong. But that is the tendency of a religious mindset. You use your God stuff to say I'm good in every area. You know what I mean? But Jesus is going to burst that open. Now, why does he interrupt the ordinary? Why does he tear down walls to seat the sick? Why does he burst the old to make way for the new? It's also we can join the wedding feast. And so people think, do you guys want to do the application first? Okay, let's do the application real quick. So let me give a few ways that you can apply what we've talked about so far. So number one, for those of you who are already Christian and would say you have a relationship with God, I would say allow yourself and your life plans to be interrupted by God. We don't like getting interrupted. My wife does not like getting interrupted by people. If there's one thing I can say about myself that I've done well as a Christian, it's that I have not been successful enough to be busy. And so because my schedule is open most of the time, when God would call me, I would follow him because really I have nothing better to do. Honestly. And so a lot of the things that I've done in my life that have been really, really amazing have been a result of my openness to being interrupted by God. So I always use this example. God doesn't always do this, but I would say it kind of illustrates an attitude that I think is really good. When I was in college, I would do long distance running, maybe 3 or 4 times a week. I would run maybe 5 miles. I loved it. Now I'm too old and my knees hurt, so I don't do it anymore. But I want to get back into it. So I would do a relatively consistent routine of stretching. I would do a thing where I would spell the alphabet with my feet like that to kind of get my shins ready, avoid shin splints. And so I went outside the gate of my school, and I did my exercises, 10 minutes, did some stretching, and then I started going on my run. And then after literally 30 seconds, I had a feeling, which I interpret as God, saying to me, go back inside to your room. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I want to go on my run. So then I kept on running, maybe 30 more seconds, and then I got this impression again where I think God was saying to me, go back inside to your room. And so I allowed myself to get interrupted, which I don't even know why I did that, but I went back inside. I felt like it was God. I went into my room, and I sat down on my bed. 5 minutes later, one of my friends at school gave me a call, and he said, can we talk? So he was going through some stuff, some girl problems, among other things. And so instead of me running around the school, I walked with him around the school, and we had a really meaningful 1.5 to 2 hour conversation about God, about different things. Now, could you say that was just coincidental? Absolutely. But I believe that was God interrupting my normal routine and schedule and habits to do something good. And this is actually more what organic life in Christ looks like. It's not just doing habits all the time. The habits are so important because what you do with your day becomes what you do with your life, right? So if you read your Bible every day, that says something about who you will become. But if you're reading your Bible and God interrupts you because someone calls you and is like, do you want to talk? Absolutely be interrupted by that. But the problem is, a lot of the times we think the things we're doing are so important, like whether it's work or like whether it's our studying. The example I always use for the kids is like, if you're studying and you feel stressed about this test, are you willing to be interrupted by a friend who needs help with their own studying, or they're going through some like personal issues that are really, really difficult? Are you willing to maybe even get a worse grade on your test for the sake of loving some of your friends? That's a challenge, right? And maybe you can do both, maybe you can still get a good grade, but are you willing to take that risk and be interrupted? So the first one, let yourself be interrupted by God. This generally, I would say, looks like showing love to people that in ways that you don't expect and you didn't plan for. So, like, anyway, my wife could tell you, I have long theological discussions with, like, the guy fixing our sprinklers, and for some reason this happens to me. I just run into people and we talk about God and stuff, kind of in unexpected ways. Anyway, let yourself be interrupted. Number 2, let Jesus diagnose your problem. Let Jesus diagnose your problem. When Jesus says something is wrong with you, take that and say, that is good news, because if Jesus says there's something wrong with me, he's going to help me fix it. He's going to help heal it and change me and transform me. And the first step to changing and being transformed is to get out of denial. Number 3, let God renovate your house. Let God renovate your heart. Here's a C.S. Lewis quote. Imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. At first, perhaps you can understand what he's doing. He's getting the drains right and stopping the leaks in the roof. You knew those jobs needed doing. You're not surprised. But presently, he starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably and does not seem to make any sense. What on earth is he up to? He's knocking down walls. He's not just doing simple renovations. The explanation is that he is building a quite different house from the one you thought of. Throwing out a new wing here, putting on an extra floor there, running up towers, making courtyards. You thought you were being made into a decent little college, but he is building a palace. He intends to come and live in it himself. So we have small plans for our lives. If your plan is to make enough money so you can buy a house and have kids and have a good retirement, that is a small plan compared to what God has in mind for you. But the problem is, you have to be interrupted from your small plan and be willing to get knocked around by God, where he changes your direction. He is changing you. I love this book title where it says, beautiful people don't just happen. If you want to be someone who is deep, who is able to hear and help people who are suffering, like Yvonne is a counselor, you have to go through suffering yourself. You have to go through suffering. You have to be willing to let God shape and change you in ways that are uncomfortable. But when you go along with this process and you stick in this for the long term, you will become a beautiful person, someone who is a good friend, a good spouse, a good parent. And that's because of the life of God inside of you. The wine inside of you, which is Jesus himself, is fermenting and stretching you and growing you. And if you fight against him, he will burst you. But even that would be for your good, because you need your patterns and framework and way of seeing life to be broken down for something better. Let God renovate your heart. He does this also, we can join the wedding feast. Real quick, Jesus said to them, can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. And so Jesus finishes with the image of a party. When I was in college, I had a friend from Pakistan, and when his brother got married, Some of my friends went to this wedding in Pakistan. They had a 3-day wedding, and there were dancing horses, okay? This was a huge party, a huge event. There were drinks and food all around, dancing. Everyone had a wonderful time. Jewish people, when they held wedding feasts during this time, it wasn't just 3 days, it was 7 days. And so for 7 days, everyone in the village would get together and have the greatest celebration. And so when Jesus is saying, why are you fasting? The wedding groom is here. He's saying, this is all about me. When I came to the world, I came so you could join my wedding feast. At this wedding feast, sinners are healed and set free. At this wedding feast, depressed people are brought joy and new hope in their life. And so the proper response to the Son of God coming into the world to set people and heal them is to celebrate. And so fasting was a practice where people would say, oh, this national disaster is happening. Let's fast. Or someone's going through terrible suffering. Let's identify with their suffering by also suffering ourselves. And Jesus is saying, you have it all wrong. Fasting is perfectly fine as a religious practice. If it helps your relationship with God, go ahead. But right now is not the right time to fast. Right now is the time to celebrate. And so the whole reason why Jesus interrupts Levi is so Levi can have something better than the old life he had. The reason why Jesus tears down walls to seek sinners is because Jesus wants these sinners to be healed and set free from their sin, from their sickness, from death, from their relational breakdown. The reason why Jesus bursts our structures, old wineskins to make room for the new, is because our lives are too small. And Jesus wants to expand into every area of our life and even burst the boundaries more than we can imagine. And so, like for you kids who go to Mexico, I think that's what you experience, right? Jesus is way bigger than, God is bigger, Christianity is bigger than you ever would have imagined. The world is bigger than you ever could have imagined. There is more to life than Silicon Valley. And that's good news, because it's better. It's a better way of living. It's a new celebration. And so I just want you to know, if you don't know Jesus, this is what he's about. He is about healing you and setting you free. And he's not vanilla basic Jesus. He's not about being gloomy. Like, I'm kind of gloomy a lot of the times. And Jesus has made me less gloomy than I was before. He really has. Jesus has made me so much more joyful than I was before. I still go into my little temperaments and my moods, but because of Jesus, my life is so much richer. It's more of a celebration. I have more deeper relationships than I ever could have imagined. I don't constantly push people away from me because I want to be by myself, or I'm scared of risking myself and putting myself out there. Will you join his feast? Let's pray. Dear Lord, I pray you would work in the ways you do, challenge, confront, tear us down, deconstruct us in whatever ways we need so that we could have something better, which is the richness and joy and deliciousness of a life with you at your wedding feast. I pray, God, you would give us a taste of your goodness and joy so that we would want more, that we would come to you every Sunday, whenever we do, Fridays, every moment of our lives, we'd be able to taste the richness of your food and your goodness and your love for us. I pray you would help us, humble us into the ground, help us recognize we need healing and that we're sick, but trusting that you heal us and you set us free. In Jesus' name, amen.